こんにちは、ハリケーンフットボールです。今回の教材は、リーズユナイテッドの田中碧に関する動画です。田中碧は、FA カップのバーミンガム戦で先発出場しましたが、リーグ戦では3試合出番なしと、出場時間をさらに減らし続けています。リーズファンも、今のリーグでの勝ち点の積み上げに不満はなく、ファルカの手腕にも文句よりも称賛すべきという意見が多く、グルエブも自身の役割を全うし続け、ノッティンガム・フォレスト戦で2アシストも見せたことで、さらにポジションを確立したような状況に思えます。田中碧を出せというファンももうほとんどいないように感じますが、今回は、ワンリーズの動画にて、田中碧はプレミアリーグで通用する選手だと強調し、なぜ今田中碧が出られないことが仕方がないことであるのか、チームや監督の立場や状況から、今の状況も否定できないという話をしています。実際にどのように話しているのか、チェックしてみましょう。
When you're looking at that midfield dimension now, then what do you do with Tanaka long term?
Long term, Tanaka's still got a place in this Leeds team for me. There's no question about that for me. Whether we play a 4-3-3, whatever system we play, for me, our best midfield. If we're talking about the short term, I can understand why we're just trying to get through the next couple of weeks and just stay up at this moment in time and just have that continuity. But for me, longer term, it's Ampadu sitting, Tanaka on the left, Stach on the right. That's the way I see it.
I know me and you gas him up a hell of a lot when it comes to Tanaka, and I think people, for whatever reason, have seem to forget how good and how important Tanaka's been. And I think it's about of confidence at the minute. I think he's really struggling with those lack of minutes that me and you have spoken about before in terms of substitutes and rotation, maybe not getting as many minutes to build up match fitness. I think people maybe forget how important and vital match sharpness and fitness actually is, not just training. You have to be in a match environment to be able to gain that sort of momentum in games. And I just wonder now, Oscar, I know what you're saying about your team. I think Farke...
Maybe. I'm not necessarily saying that's what's going to happen, but I would say Tanaka's a Premier League footballer for me. I would genuinely say that.
Yeah, I can't see it. Like you say, I think there's too many, and I get it from Farke's perspective because he probably thinks to himself, I need players in and around who are maybe more physically adaptable, maybe players who have more pressing intensity in that midfield, and obviously you need some physical players in there like Ampadu and Stach as it is. And I feel like Tanaka just falls out of that void at the minute, or falls into the void of maybe being one of those who surplus to requirements is very, very difficult to say for me because I absolutely love Al Tanaka. But I just wonder, as a 27, 28-year-old lad, I just wonder where his place is at Leeds United. And I can't imagine it's going to go beyond this year, especially when Leeds might be able to cash in when his stock is relatively high, which I would see as a massive shame. And I know you would too, but I just don't see, because I think Leeds are going to have to be very similar to what we are right now for probably a couple of years now, 2 or 3 years, where we're going to have to adapt. Finishing 17th, if we do stay up, is still going to be seen as like a trophy for the next 2 or 3 seasons. Think Brighton and how long that happened with them. And I just think to myself, if it is Farke and if Farke is still in charge, I can't see Tanaka working at all at Leeds United. I don't see him getting minutes.
Yeah, I agree. I think, this is certainly a fair one to say. I think if we have a system that works now, I think we'll probably will stick with it next season. But I would say you probably do need to constantly adapt with the Premier League. I think the league changes all the time. I think you'll see a lot of the teams, if we do stay up, the 3 teams that come up this season will follow what us and Sunderland have done. They will go for physicality in midfield. And all of a sudden then you have less of a kind of a USP in the team kind of thing. I think our USP at the minute is that physicality we have in the team combined with some good experience across the board there as well. Maybe not so much in the Premier League, but good experience in terms of Bogle and Stach at playing in a top 5 league in Europe. So it's interesting from that point of view. You say the same about Nonto, question marks there. What's Nonto's sort of medium-term future at the club? Not even long-term. We're talking medium-term here. Tanaka, it's the same. You could say it about a couple of other players. Potentially a Dan James maybe if he doesn't get over these injuries. You could say that about
as well. Physicality does comprise of things like speed, doesn't it? Yeah. Agility, endurance. Physicality isn't just a thing where it's all about brute force.
No, not at all.
It does take into consideration these other, attributes, and that's where you're looking at maybe the likes of Brendan Aronson. And people might say, well, he's not physical. Technically, he is. He's got a lot of these tendencies that physical, the umbrella of being physical is where, Aronson, like when we're talking about agility, speed, endurance, it's kind of where he thrives in a sense, isn't it?
Exactly that. And I think if you go from like the Farke first season of the Championship to the Farke second season, and of course a lot of it was kind of enforced on us with the fact that Gray Rutter and Somerville left, I think Farke started to adapt there, not to the extreme level it is now in terms of physicality, but you kind of saw with some of the recruitment, the players we brought in to replace the likes of Rutter, Somerville, Gray, in terms of Brendan Aronson going into that 10, for example, instead of Jorginho Rutter, in terms of to back up the press, for example. You kind of saw for example, Largi Ramazani come in instead of Crescencio Somerville. Okay, Ramazani didn't keep his place in the team, but the idea was, a more sort of pacier, sort of wide threat rather than a ball to feet, sort of creative winger in that kind of sense. So that was interesting. So you kind of saw changes across the board. Jayden Bogle, for example, coming in for Archie Gray, more of a traditional sort of conventional fullback, rather than Archie Gray playing as sort of like a midfielder at right back, inverting into the midfield when needed, kind of thing. We kind of saw that change, from an idealist. I thought Farke was quite idealistic in that first season, and then the second season you kind of saw the adaptations. Of course, a lot of it was enforced on us, but you're kind of seeing a slow kind of sort of move towards this. I think now we're kind of at that point where you kind of see what Farke wants from his team at this level. He's kind of seeing what he didn't have at Norwich and what he has got now, and why there's such a big difference in terms of points, win percentage, etc., etc. All the performance metrics are so heavily weighted towards this being the better route. So it's interesting from that point of view. And for me, a look at Tanaka, I think the bigger issue of Tanaka is the role rather than him himself physically. I don't think Tanaka's lightweight, for example. I think that's quite a harsh analysis. I think last season in the rough and tumble of the Championship, you saw Tanaka pull it out about quite a bit, in terms of putting big tackles in, backing up the press quite a lot. And that's part of where the issue comes with Tanaka. I think he's a very tenacious footballer off the ball. I'm not going to say he's some kind of pressing monster or anything like that, or a monster off the ball, but he does back up his technical quality with, really good work rate off the ball. And you kind of see this season, our midfielders don't quite have that same kind of license to join the press. We don't really press as high, in the Premier League compared to what we get in the Championship.
I think he's been caught a few times on the ball as well, Oscar.
Of course, there's that. Less time on the ball's a factor. I think a couple of the goals as well, if we're having it right, if we're going on the balance side of things, Tanaka has been culpable for a few goals.
I always look back to isn't it? It's keeping up with play.
Well, there's two goals I always look back to. I look back to the Szoboszlai for the 3-2 against Liverpool that we drew 3-3. I remember Tanaka losing Szoboszlai very early in that move. I think we didn't actually defend that move particularly badly. It was a great Liverpool move, and Tanaka's lost Szoboszlai at the end of it. And then I look back at the goal a week later. I think Tanaka did start that game where Jordan Henderson scored. I remember Tanaka, I think, lost Henderson quite early in that move. I think it was the Henderson goal. It was certainly a goal we conceded around then. And it feels like, to me, that was a big turning point for Tanaka in this Leeds team. In terms of, as much as I think Tanaka is a far better footballer than Ilya Gruev, and I don't want to have too much of a go at Ilya Gruev, because Ilya Gruev, I think, looks better at Premier League level than what he did in the Championship because of the qualities he offers in that kind of sense. But in terms of Farke's system, I understand it. I get it. I mean, look, we don't have to go back too far with Farke. I've already mentioned Norwich. He had Kenny McLean playing over Billy Gilmore, for example.
Yeah,
that didn't work, by the way. That worked horrendously badly in the Premier League. But we've seen this before with Farke. He's not too bothered by the technical qualities in midfield. He just wants reliability in midfield. For a Farke team, it's always going to be about both boxes rather than between.
You've got me on a fantastic segue there, mate. So just,
I know that's a heck of a seg. I never thought for 1 minute I would say mentioning Kenny McLean in a One Leeds video.
Oscar, with you,
isn't it?
We never know what names are going to be popped out the hat.
No, do you? It could be anything,
But Jason said, if we stay up, do you think Farke will bring in players to move back to his preferred formation, or stick with the current formation and bring in better players? Oscar, short answer for that, mate, if you can.
For me, it depends on who's available. I don't think we've seen the end of the back four necessarily. I still think a back four can work. I genuinely do still think a back four can work, but it's not the best approach with this group of players. I think you've got to add certainly at least one more winger to make a 4-3-3 work. I think you can't just rely on Okafor to hold the width on one side and things like that. Maybe another midfielder. There's a couple more signings needed for a 4-3-3 to properly work for me.
Yeah, 100%.
次は解説です。本日は口語的な普段使えそうな表現もいくつかありましたので、本日の解説をチェックしてみましょ
う。I know me and you gas him up a hell of a lot when it comes to Tanaka and
ガスアップは本来ガソリンを入れるという意味の駆動詞です。ただし会話では人を持ち上げる、褒めてテンションを上げるというスラングでも使われます。例えば Don't gas me up は持ち上げないでという意味です。サッカーの会話では選手を褒めちぎるときに使われます。 ただし少し砕けた表現なので、フォーマルな場では避けた方が無難です。日本語にするなら褒めちぎる、持ち上げるが自然です。
I know me and you gas him up a hell of a lot when it comes to Tanaka, and I know me and you gas him up a hell of a lot when it comes to Tanaka, and or falls into the void of maybe being one of those who
fall into the void は比喩的に宙ぶらりんになる、居場所がなくなるという意味です。誰にも扱われず、どこにも当てはまらない状態を表します。ただし定番のイディオムというより、その場の比喩表現です。日常会話で品質ではありませんが、評論や分析では使われます。サッカーなら役割がなくなった選手の状況を説明するときに使えます。日本語では、宙に浮く、居場所を失うと訳すと自然です。void は契約で、無効の意味でも使われるので、文脈に注意します。
or falls into the void of maybe being one of those who or falls into the void of maybe being one of those who
have less of a kind of a USP in the team kind of thing. I think
USP とは Unique Selling Proposition の略です。意味は他と差別化できる独自の強みです。ビジネスではなぜ顧客が自社を選ぶのかという理由になり、スポーツではチームの武器という意味で使われます。例えば、Our USP is Physicality はうちの武器はフィジカルですという意味です。フォーマルというより分析的な表現です。
you have less of a kind of a USP in the team kind of thing. You have less of a kind of a USP in the team kind of thing. I think, of course, a lot of it was enforced on us, but
being forced on や being forced upon は押し付けられる、強いられるという意味です。自分たちが望んで選んだのではなく、外的要因でそうせざるを得ないときに使います。サッカーなら、怪我や視力流出で戦い方を変えざるを得ない状況で使えます。口語ではオンもありますが、文章としてはオポンの方が自然です。本来規則を徹底するという意味もあります。文脈で思考かいじられるかを見分けるのがポイントです。日本語では余儀なくされると訳すと綺麗です。
Of course, a lot of it was enforced on us, but so heavily weighted towards this being the better route.
Weighted towards は何々より何かを重視しているという意味です。もともとは重さの weight から来ていて、比喩として重要度の重みを表します。採取のペン基準や評価指標がどちらに偏っているかを説明するときに便利です。Heavily weighted towards というと、強く偏っているという意味になります。会話でも使いますが、分析やビジネスの文脈で特に多い表現です。日本語では何々より何かに重きが置かれていると訳すと自然です。サッカー解説でもパフォーマンス指標の話でよく使えます。
So heavily weighted towards this being the better route. So heavily weighted towards this being the better route. I think last season in the rough and tumble of the championship.
Rough and tumble は荒っぽいぶつかり合いや混戦という意味です。スポーツではフィジカルの激しさを表すときによく使われます。チャンピオンシップやプレミアリーグの厳しさを説明するのに便利です。もともとは子供が転げ回って遊ぶ取っ組み合いから来ています。そこから政治やビジネスなど厳しい競争環境にも使われます。少しカジュアルな表現で会話や解説でよく聞きます。日本語では激しいぶつかり合い、荒れた展開が自然です。
I think last season in the rough and tumble of the championship. I think last season in the rough and tumble of the championship.
You've got me on a fantastic segue there, mate.
セグイは話題を自然につなぐ移行という意味の単語です。会話や司会進行、ポッドキャストなどでよく聞きます。セグインとは何かにうまく話を移すという意味になります。元は音楽用語で途切れず次に移るというイメージです。トイックでは品質な必要はありませんが、ネイティブの会話ではよく出ます。日本語では話の流れ、いいつなぎと訳すと自然です。
You've got me on a fantastic segue there, mate. You've got me on a fantastic segue there, mate.
いかがでしたか？これまでの田中碧の活躍や素晴らしいプレーやパフォーマンスを忘れてしまったのかというのは、日本の田中碧ファンが大声にして言いたいところだと思いますが、それさえも忘れてしまっているように感じるほど、良い時のプレーはあまり語られない一方で、小さなミスというのか、ミッツと呼ばれるものというのか、ポジションを離れたとか、相手のマークを外したとか、寄せが遅かったとか、1試合で何度でも起きそうな場面を、チームでカバーするべきような場面でも、一人のプレイヤーの批判の材料に使われているようにも思えるほど、田中碧の失点に関与されたとされるし、軍が田中碧が使われない主な理由として定着しているように感じます。この動画では、 ファンのみんなも忘れてしまっているようなことだという名誉記で、田中碧の良さや、これまでの良い活躍を思い出させ、出場していないことが、さらにプレーを悪化させていることも改めて強調しています。それでも今のチームでは、田中碧が使われないことも、これまでのチームの歴史や、ファルカの過去を振り返ると、今の戦い方になることも、ファルカ自身が改善した結果でもあり、プレミアリーグで生き残るための正解の一つであるとも言っているように感じます。田中碧が、これからもこのチームで居場所がなかなかないだろうというのは、私も以前から何度も言っている気もしますが、1月での移籍が本当は別途だったと思いますし、次の夏の移籍ができることを願いながら、それまではただただ出場機会が来た時に、田中碧らしい素晴らしいパフォーマンスをあまり周りの目を意識せずに、存分に楽しんでプレーしてほしいと願っています。本日もご視聴いただきありがとうございました。またすぐにお会いしましょう。